looking to the future then, if we can very quickly, obviously massive changes coming in 2022. From what you've been able to take and migrate across, if there has been anything, how big a challenge has that been, sort of taking something from the current generation and sort of upcycling it to 22? And what do you see as the main hurdles to overcome with this new 2022 car?
Crikey, it's actually a really big mix and match, to be honest, because in terms of components, there's very little. I mean, there's certain things like systems. If you take the hydraulic systems or some of the electrical installation and then sort of the boxes associated with that, maybe aspects of braking system, of the fire extinguisher, all these internal systems have a certain level of carryover, or at least a very close design to what we're used to now, because they're fundamentally doing a very similar job, but just in a very different, well, look like a very different car. As far as the bits you'll see, and because of other rules, things like the gearbox and so on, it's a completely blank sheet of paper. So there's very little physical carryover, or really even design carryover to a certain extent. The biggest carryover, probably, which you won't see at all, but is the biggest part of it for us, is the knowledge that you have of what you believe makes a car go quick. Between 21 and 22 cars, that sort of understanding and those sorts of targets still absolutely play the same game. You're not going to have a very different approach to 22 in terms of what you're trying to achieve with your car. So I think the knowledge carries over, and you can kind of use that to shape your plan and shape how you want to design it and what your priorities are. But when it comes to the actual components themselves, very little really, because the rules really are very, very different. As far as the challenge is concerned, I think working to new rules is always quite a big challenge, because there's a lot to learn. Even though we have a knowledge of what we're trying to achieve, you've got to learn it in a new environment, in a new set of boundaries. Really, these regs are quite constraining compared to what we're used to at the moment. So a lot of learning in trying to adapt your process and your capabilities and how you go about designing the car to the regulations. The aerodynamics is the biggest change, to be honest with you. We have the tires, of course. We'll have certain aspects of suspension which are different as well. But the aerodynamics is the most obvious visible thing that's different, and it is the biggest challenge as well. So I think adapting to a car which has got many new tools and less tools than you have in 21 to develop downforce is I'd say by far the biggest challenge, and it's a real learning curve. You think you're doing okay, and you find a good step, or you're doing well, and then you have a flat line for a month. It's quite a challenge. Yeah.
The drivers this year have both sort of stated that the McLaren is a very specific, very unique car to drive. And in talking to both of them, and I had a chat with Andreas a couple of races ago about whether that peculiarity of the car would be something that inherently sort of naturally carried itself over into 2022. Do you believe that will be the case, or is it so new that the guys are only really going to know if that inherent feel of the car has been carried over once they kind of get into it? Is there anything that they've asked for specifically differently, and how does that kind of change your thought process and your workload going into that car?
Yeah, I mean, we are aware of what our car feels like and handles, and there are some unique characteristics to it. And it has been a topic of discussion, certainly since I've been McLaren, actually for almost 3 years now, in trying to improve certain sort of known weaknesses. So, I think some of it is just inbuilt. It's not entirely aerodynamic, but that's obviously the biggest player in performance between one car and another. And some of those characteristics are certainly from an aerodynamic point of view. As a car develops, so you sort of build in certain concepts or certain behaviors into it, which give you a sort of an end product which handles in a certain way or has a certain amount of downforce or what have you. And some of the characteristics we can see are either giving us very strong results, and certainly if you look at the data behind the car, you can see Monza was going to be strong. Equally, you can see Zandvoort would be a bit tricky for us, which it was. So we're kind of aware of what characteristics work for us and against us. They do match what the drivers say as well. And they're there as an intrinsic part of the car. We could knock them out, but we'd lose a load of performance by doing so at this stage. So having a new car does give us a fresh opportunity, and gives everyone a fresh opportunity ultimately. So yes, we are looking to try and have a more consistent handling in 22. We'll have to see how well we do with that. There's methodologies and tools which could influence it as well, of course. But it does give us an opportunity to make the car handle differently. But equally, we want to hang on to our strengths as well, and sometimes they go a little bit hand in hand. So it's a case of taking it a step at a time and deciding which is the best approach as we learn more about the 22 car.